So we are back again here, and I would like to pass now the microphone to iNADO to Jorge, please.
Thank you, Andrea. Welcome back, everyone. So perfect. Now we see David Howman. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. For those of you who just joined, my name is Jorge Leyva from iNADO, and together with Play the Game in NADO Germany, I welcome you to the second part of the day. We now will hear from David Howman, Chair of the Athletics Integrity Unit, his view on the governance challenges of anti-doping today. The perspective of a governing body of sport will be very interesting in the seminar, which turns around mainly national anti-doping organizations. David is joining us in the middle of the night, so I'm sure this is not the first and the last time he has to do this. I'm sure your neighbors think you're a spy already, David. Nevertheless, thank you very much. David, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge. Kia ora koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the opportunity to provide what Jens described to me as an independent review of the project. First of all, congratulations to the researchers for a very significant piece of work in anti-doping. Secondly, thanks to those who funded the project, Play the Game and the Erasmus program of the European Union. And finally, thanks to those who supported it or participated in the project. It's fantastic now to see the results of the project so clearly enunciated today. The task given to me allows me to provide a view on the conclusions reached, and I have kindly been given, quote, full freedom to look among the findings for those I find most thought-provoking. As I read the project report, I kept reminding myself of the task the research team set itself, and I'm therefore commencing my views by stating some of the important components of that task as I see it, and which I have drawn from the report itself. Number one, how to best secure independence and avoid conflicts of interest at national anti-doping organisations. That to me connotes best practice, and I was immediately lurched into action by the question posed by Walter Palmer to say, are we remembering our base task? And I'll come back to that. Second point, how to define the role of athletes in governance. The third point, how to inspire is an interesting word, continuous improvement in the governance of the World Anti-Doping Agency. Each of these matters is a really significant one, and more significant currently. Therefore, the research project has great currency and great relevance. I have said at previous webinars on anti-doping that some of the answers to these vital areas require agreed or accepted definitions or answers to basic questions. And these questions include, what is independence? What is independence in anti-doping? What is a conflict of interest? Who is an athlete? Are we talking about these terms without actually telling ourselves who might be in the category of athlete? Is it everybody covered by the national anti-doping regulations? Is it any athlete who's competed at primary school level? Is it an athlete who has been competing internationally? And when? We have a lot of issues to discuss in that respect. And how can WADA be inspired? So all of these matters might take quite a while for me to answer, and I suggest that they are topics of extra debate. So I'm going to leave them floating to see if the outcomes of this project respond or help us. My initial reactions to the report. what a great tool for National Anti-Doping Organisation board leaders, those who are responsible for governance, not management, governance, those who set policies and set the strategies that provide management work to look at on an operational level to ensure the bodies that need to achieve compliance with a world code and set of standards achieve that. And just as an aside, is compliance easy, or is it becoming very, very time consuming? What are the strategies that boards of national anti-doping organisations are setting to achieve compliance, and how much do they depend upon good governance? I think I know the answers, but I would like others to accept them as questions to be answered. And finally, what is the incentive for NADOs to achieve compliance? And what is the incentive for NADOs to achieve good governance? Looking at the current rules and the guide in place that WADA has reached along with NADOs, there is a guide which is not mandatory and not applied to international federations, called Operational Independence of NADOs under the 2021 World Anti-Doping Code. I look at quotes in relation to the issue of independence as described there from others. iNADO, and very properly, says that clean sport movement effectiveness rests on anti-doping organisations' ability to maintain full independence with no interference from sport. The IOC says WADA must be equally independent from both sport organisations and national interests. WADA has stated it's a critical element of the World Anti-Doping Code that NADOs, such as RUSADA, remain safe from interference of the relevant national Olympic and Paralympic committees in their operational decisions. Note, no mention of governmental interference. This report addresses that and fills that gap. NADGO confronts it from the funding aspect, and as an impression to me at least suggests that NADOs can be told what to do operationally by the funders, and therefore that interferes with operational independence. That has to be countered to a degree by, in the Western world at least, government funds always has an accountability factor to those who are funded. You must report back to the funder in order to preclude, or may I suggest prevent, corruption. So there is that component which must always come into funding. To look at the specific findings and the conclusions, the confronting questions of this issue remain. Money from government. Is it okay? Is it okay to receive it? Does it preclude operational independence? And I would suggest that that is case-by-case study, as is revealed from the real outcomes, NADO to NADO, that this project has delivered. Can I also say that as we go forward, there are going to be restrictions on funding, mostly due to the effects of the pandemic. We must expect budgetary constraints going forward, as of course most of our societies are going to require a lot more energy given in the area of health and recovery. The big question that I come back to again is, are NADOs delivering quality, or is it a quantity now is enough response? And the very revealing part of the findings in this report are the inconsistencies or the differences from country to country, NADO to NADO. NADOs practice differently. They practice with different policies and strategies set upon them by their funders or their governments, but they're all compliant, so we're told. Is there to be a best practice model, and who will develop that? Because I can see from this report there is a lot of energy and innovation in the NADO world which is leading to progress made, which might better be made from those leading the whole anti-doping fight. So come down to operational independence and conflicts of interest. The report says they remain key issues. Are we surprised at that? I'm certainly not. I think the industry itself is leading to a degree of complacency and not looking at creating the quality that this report indicates is important. I'm really pleased to see that among the outcomes, there is a stronger governmental approach to the framework of sport integrity. It's a matter that I have talked about over many years, but yet another term that requires definition and something that should be looked at going forward by those engaged in the area. Turning to the scores, they're not surprising to me, bearing in mind the limitations of the project enunciated by the project team, and having regard to the established and longer serving organisations advancing higher scores. That would be expected as a matter of experience. And I think the necessary outcome of that is for those who have been around for a while to mentor and assist those who have entered the anti-doping world a little later. And I acknowledge here the significant work done by iNADO in striving to improve the work of its members around the world. So when I look at the overall report, the overall trends and tendencies outlined in the project team's report are valuable and informative. The action recommendations are excellent. My real spur comes from the provocative questions posed in the last part of the project report, which was posted on earlier this evening or today. And I would encourage people to again look at them, to look at the challenge of ensuring coherent wording and terminology, to look at the difficulties that exist from country to country in terms of their basic governance, their parliamentarian approach, and the discrepancies that occur as a result. They are challenges to be faced if we are to try to achieve greater consistency. So I'm really pleased at this report. I'm really pleased, although perhaps a little deflated, by the correct academic self-peer review of the limitations of the project. I think it's very important for the project team to have acknowledged that. But in my final comments, can I say two or three things? Can we expect change at the top of the anti-doping tree as a result of this? NADOs cannot and should not carry the full weight of good governance alone. Best practice needs to occur right throughout the anti-doping movement and needs to commence from the very top. My last comment is that we must not lose sight of the objective that we all have in the anti-doping movement. That is to remove those who cheat by doping and to reduce the level of doping itself and therefore protecting clean sport. My plea is, can we get better at that? Please. It's very vital for us not to lose sight of our overall objective in running anti-doping, and that is to create a level playing field. That is to ensure that those who cheat are sanctioned. That is to ensure that we do our very best to make a better opportunity for those who play fair and play clean to achieve the goals that they are all after. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, David, for your presentation. Please stay with us. Don't close your camera. Let me mention at this stage, I think we're running about 15 minutes late or behind schedule. So it will be a pity to cut, to end this event at 4:30 sharp. So we will extend the event today for a couple of minutes, just to have the opportunity to discuss with other project partners about precisely independence in anti-doping, one of the issues raised by David in his presentation. So if the audience has any question for David, can address them during the panel discussions we will have in a few minutes. So I think it is now the time for the other panelists to turn on their cameras. Very good. All right. I think we're all set. Well, thank you very much for joining again. This section of the day is dedicated to independence of anti-doping organizations. This was one of the sections studied in the NADGO project. And earlier today, we had the opportunity to hear from the researchers the scores achieved by 8 European NADOs and 3 further NADOs from overseas in the National Anti-Doping Governance Observer. The NADGO project showed large variations in the level of governance, and that includes operational independence. So as David mentioned, I encourage you, everyone, to get your hands on the report and look at the outcomes. I think operational independence and conflict of interest, as the project shows, remains a key issue, as he also mentioned. But there's another conclusion of the project, which is political systems and political culture matter. So they affect independence. It's not a matter of goodwill only. So in this section, we want to step out of the strict definition of operational independence and get the personal perspective from the panelists and discuss with them the limits of independence in a broader sense. How much independence is possible? What are the minimum standards of independence? And maybe consider some of the thoughts that David just thrown into the discussion. So to discuss this topic today, we have Saneta Saderova, Director of the Slovak Anti-Doping Agency. Thank you. Andrea Gottsman, Chairwoman, National Anti-Doping Agency, Germany. Una May, Director of Participation and Ethics of Sport at Sport Ireland. This is the Sport Development Authority in Ireland. Michal Rinkowski, Director, Polish Anti-Doping Agency. Michael S., Director, Anti-Doping Denmark, and David Howman, Chair of the Athletics Integrity Unit. I welcome you and thank you for your time. Before we get started, let me just mention that this is conceived as an interactive session with the audience, so we will ask panelists to kick off the discussion with an initial short statement addressing the question, is real independence possible in anti-doping and how can we achieve it? And after that, we look forward to receiving the questions of the audience. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's panelists by typing your question in the question pane of the control panel, and you may send your questions at any time. So we will begin with Saneta. Saneta, please tell us, in your view, is real independence possible in anti-doping and how can we achieve it?
Thank you very much. The voice is okay? Can you hear me? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jorge. Thank you, Jens and researchers and partners of this project. Thanks for the participation in this project because it was for me very interesting experience. And I would like say that the Slovak Anti-Doping Agency is a small NADOs with only 9 people, and sometimes it's very hard to do our work because we have a lack of the human resources. But what for me means independence. The independence means for me also the huge responsibility. And that's why I appreciate the monitoring and control process of the code by the WADA. Slovak Anti-Doping Agency is a state contributory organization and must be in compliance not only with WADA standards, but also with national law system, which increases our credibility and transparency. I was able to understand everything that affects the independence of anti-doping system, not only here in Slovakia, but also in much greater context. The base of an independent anti-doping organization is the legislation and legal protection of the head of NADO. It is crucial for the legislation to be independent, independent from government and sport movement on the national level, as well as to be related with transparent publishing of as much data as possible, mirroring the credibility of the whole system. However, the independence is not only affected by the paperwork management and setting up of processes. The anti-doping system is more likely about the people disposing of the right personnel and moral values. For me, it's very important to communicate and to publish the key NADOs activities with athletes, media, and public in general. Despite of all the process and management, the funding is one of the many huge problems common for all organizations. There are many types of anti-doping agencies, either agencies under the state jurisdiction or private companies. There are many differences in structure of NADOs and culture in each country. The strict procedural rules must be introduced both on national and international level. As a CEO of National Anti-Doping Agency, in my point of view, it is very important that we transparently communicate all NADO's activity with sports movement at the national level. We are part of international cooperation groups, which empowers our independent position. For example, SEADO or iNADO. I think that this project will be useful for me and for the future, and we will continue work to better governance. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Saneta. I took well, you mentioned the size of your NADO might be perhaps a limited to independence because it just hinders the capacity of your NADO to deal with the really broad scope of issues. And I think
Yes.
I wouldn't disagree with that. So now we want to hear from Andrea Gottsman, her view on the limitations of independence in our field.
So thank you, Jorge, and we are back in our NADO headquarters in Bonn here, and this is a corona-safe wall in between, just for explanation why we are sitting here without any masks. So for 2.5 years, we have dealt with the project of governance structures in NADOs. It was exciting and overall educational time for us. Proven and tested good governance principle in business that have been practiced for a long time cannot be simply transferred to sport. However, the topic has gained more and more importance in organized sport. In particular, the definition of conflict of interest and independence are hotly debated and questioned in many areas. The specific conditions of sports organizations, which combined voluntary work and professionalism in a unique way, do not make it easy to find the right path. In the context of national and international sport, the national anti-doping agencies play a special role, as the independence of action is of elementary importance here. The question of good governance and independence of operation in particular was stressed with the Russian doping scandal. The demand for reforms and changes became louder. The implementation of the NADO Governance Observer Project was of great importance for NADA Germany. In very fruitful discussions with the scientists, we were able to present the daily work of a national anti-doping agency, our personal point of view, our framework condition, and to be honest, the limits of our influence. NADA Germany was founded in 2002 as a foundation under civil law, and in 2011 NADA made a clear distinction between operational business and the supervisory board. The founding father and mothers envisaged a system of checks and balance. The working group managed to apply a comprehensive questionnaire in large parts taking into account the individual national circumstances. We must also state there is no one-size-fits-all model. Even if good governance structures are met, it's of major importance that the NADOs have sufficient financial resources. Independent work needs adequate and long-term secured budgets. I personally feel strengthened in the view that the principles of human rights and democracy are the supporting pillars for credible governance structures in every organization. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward for our discussion.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Long-term funding as a key element of operational independence. I think we can all agree to that. And that was part also of David's presentation. Just in the interest of keeping time and being just wary of the time, I will go directly to Una May to Ireland. Una, please let us have your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Jorge. Firstly, thanks to Play the Game and the researchers and the hosts of this event for inviting us and for allowing us to be part of the project, and also thanks to my own team as well. This has been a rigorous and complex process to create these benchmarks, and I really appreciate the work of my own team in responding to that request. I think it's important as well to acknowledge the limitations, even though David didn't like the limitations being promoted. I think it is important there are limitations to this study. But look, broadly speaking, I think it has been a very good process. And as an organisation, Sport Ireland, I suppose, would be perceived potentially as not being independent. We are an NADO, which is within an organisation, which is a state agency funded fully by the government. But we're in the same organisation that is also responsible for high performance sport. So we're very cognizant of the potential perceived conflict that raises. And that was one of our major, I suppose, reasons for taking part in this project, so that we can help to identify what are the key mechanisms for identifying, for recognising and reflecting independence. Again, we have a very strong culture of anti-doping in Ireland, and that creates a challenge in itself, because almost there's the curse of knowledge. You know, what seems obvious to us is not always obvious, and we found that in this exercise the importance of documenting procedures and processes and things that again, as I said, are obvious to us. Of course, we couldn't have somebody from a national sports governing body on our board, but we do that without necessarily documenting that. So that's been a very important learning process for us. I suppose from our point of view, the really important the issue of conflict of interest is really what we're talking about in a way when we discuss the whole area of independence. We are independent. We have an act, a Sport Ireland Act, which has a whole chapter on anti-doping, which reflects the position of the National Anti-Doping Organisation within Sport Ireland. We also have an operational agreement with our government department, a service level agreement, which clearly identifies and does document the fact that there is no interference, and there's to be full operational independence of the NADO. So that's a really important element from our point of view to provide us with additional protections. But being part of this program, we have this project, we've increased the, I suppose we've strengthened the terms of reference of our advisory committee. We've reviewed a number of different processes. And one of the big things about the advisory committee, we also have an oversight body, which is the board of Sport Ireland in general. But from our point of view, it's acknowledging not not just the conflicts of interest, but the conflicts of loyalties. And that's a really big issue, because you can identify a conflict of interest and you can potentially control for it, and you still have a huge conflict of loyalty. So regardless of whether a person once worked in a certain organization doesn't mean they still don't have a loyalty to that organization. So the culture within Sport Ireland and within Ireland in general is a really important factor in how we've operated our system. We really put a lot of emphasis on our values and our integrity, ethical decision making, transparency and accountability. So these are all really important elements of our system, and they have allowed us to have confidence in our own system. But in order to ensure that others have confidence, that's where a project like this comes into its own and allows us to be very clearly transparent in those processes and how they demonstrate themselves. And I guess one of the things that's come out, we are probably one of the more vocal NADOs when it comes to our position regarding independence, not just in NADOs, and therefore it's important for ourselves to be open and transparent in our approach when it comes to independence. But we're willing to speak out, because as David mentioned, we don't believe it should be down to the NADOs to get this right. We have to be led from the top by the organization which is responsible for governance, integrity and implementation of a worldwide, world-class anti-doping program. And that's why we're very vocal in this area. And we see, even within our own group of NADOs, we see the risk of independence or lack of independence in that not everyone is able to always, I suppose, support quite vocal and opinionated positions that we might sometimes take. And that demonstrates to us is the fact that we have an ability to have our own voice, and our own expert opinion can be heard and can be spoken. So that's just a roundup of some of the issues from our point of view.
Okay, so despite the limitation of your own structure, you see this report, this project as an opportunity to improve, but also you point out at some of the reasons why you think you have come a long way and achieved independence, sufficient independence. Very good. So I just assumed that all panelists could stay a little longer earlier. So if any of you has a conflict with that and staying a little longer, just signal that to me so we are aware. But at this point, I thank you for staying with us and for your comprehension. Now we go to Warsaw, to the Polish Anti-Doping Agency. Michał, the floor is yours. Let us have your view on independence.
Thank you very much. I hope that you hear me. Yes, it works well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and whatever you are. I'm very happy that I'm here. Thank you very much for the invitation. In just coming to the item of our discussion, independence. This is not easy to measure, and also there is no universal definition of independence. Of course, we could refer to definitions which exist in our, let's say, common culture or in the legal systems, but still, in case of anti-doping, it is a challenge, in my opinion. Of course, when we are speaking about the independence and involvement of independence, I think it's worth noticing that there is a constant evolution of strengthening the position of the NADO. So I think that the current World Anti-Doping Code is strengthening or obliging putting the obligation on the national anti-doping organizations and the governments to guarantee the operational independence of the NADO. Of course, this is a standard minimum, but still, this is definitely a step forward, which should be noted. And also, I would say that on one hand, we could say about the independence, but on the other hand, we have accountability, and those words were many times repeated today. And then we have a key word that also was mentioned many times in today's conference. It was balance. And this is I would say the issue of independence and generally the efficiency, finding the efficiency of efficient anti-doping policy. It's a matter of finding a good balance between independence, accountability, transparency, and this is really it's not easy because as we said, it's a case-by-case issue. So definitely also the independence will be differently seen in, let's say, in China, India, or in Poland or UK, whatever. So this is the difference in perception. So this is I would say something important. And I think that it was already mentioned, and I agree with that. So to have a good anti-doping program, we need operational independence, a good legal structure, generally good rules, people without conflict of interest, and also I would say the crucial thing is that the NADO operates in a friendly environment, and if it operates in a friendly environment, it's extremely hard, and also it's extremely hard for the NADO to remain resistance for the influences coming from the outside. So we have to find such solution that will fit all. And maybe sometimes in some of the NADOs, maybe we should be more, I would say, put the bar maybe higher than in case of other NADOs. But of course, this is a matter of finding a golden standard. In Poland, for example, I would say we are independent by law, but does it mean if we are really independent? So it's more about how to measure it and how to find out if we are acting independently. It's more the issue of practice also, and which is totally not easy to measure, and we know that. And in case, for example, of I would say core areas of anti-doping, this is tested planning, result management, and those areas I would say should be definitely. I would say no one else from outside of the NADO should have an impact on those critical areas. So once again, thank you, and I don't want to prolong my speech, but definitely thank you for inviting me to discuss this important issue.
No, thank you, Michal, for your views. I think similar as in Slovakia, you think paperwork is not the only. This is not only about an issue about legislation or bylaws. It's also about the people with values, as Saneta mentioned. It's about the culture and the practice of independence in the day-to-day activities. And that perhaps is one of the limitations of this project, that it cannot go further and analyze culture. And the other thing, balance. I agree with you that I think national anti-doping organizations, because of their mandate, they're faced with many multiple challenges that are just simply hard to tackle, and just striking the right balance or seeking the right balance in these 6 different areas that we saw in the NADGO project is just simply a huge challenge. So we're beginning to receive questions from the audience. Thank you. Please keep submitting your questions. Now I go to Michael Ask, Director of Anti-Doping Denmark.
Thank you, Jorge. Can you hear me all right now? Perfect. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank everyone involved in this project for the hard work you have put into this. I think the result is extremely interesting and very comprehensive, and I find it overall a very important tool for not only for NADOs, but actually hopefully also for all anti-doping organizations, because as David Howman also mentioned, we are not the only ones who are, let's say, involved in this business. We have the IFs and not least, of course, WADA as our governing body. And I hope some of these discussions and some of these also very difficult dilemmas we have, and it's something that we can carry into a more overall discussion also when it comes to WADA governance, but also the governance of integrity units in the international federations. So I think that's actually very important. And I also think generally, before I go into the independence question, that I think when we're talking about good governance, it's not a fixed structure. It's not something you can say this is good governance. It's very blurred sometimes what we are actually talking about. And I think the mere fact that we are discussing it and we are willing to constantly trying to improve and find the loopholes, find the weaknesses in our system is a factor. It's a crucial factor for us being able to develop and making our work better and more independent, because those two things will go hand in hand if we try that all the time. So I think the willingness to look at your own organization with a critical view, not to be satisfied and not to think that now we have changed this or that and now everything is perfect. The world changes all the time. The demands to us as organizations, as NADOs, have changed. The Russian doping scandal has certainly put this conflict of interest and good governance on the agenda, whereas until 5 years ago, maybe we only discussed how to test and how to maybe do some education and some of the more operational things. And now we have found this is also crucial for our ability to work. Independence, there's no easy answer to that. Nobody is totally independent, and nobody will ever be totally independent. We are all funded in some way, some of us mainly by our governments. We also still have countries where the anti-doping organization is still embedded into the National Olympic Committee in some way. And I think the most important thing is, as also Michael said before, we need to try and have as many procedures, rules, and check and balances in place, so we can exemplify what is a conflict of interest and where is the limit to where we as NADO should have our total operational independence. For instance, when it comes to who we are going to test, who are we issuing a TV and things like that. That is obvious things that we should be left alone to the NADOs to decide totally solely without any interference. And then there are a lot of other examples which is hard to go around all of them now. But I think the more we work with it, the more we have procedures, the more we can look things up in our own manuals and procedures, the more the chance to avoid those kind of conflict of interest, which can, by the way, never be totally avoided, but at least handle them in a proper and good way. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So rules and procedures as a way to limit somehow the limits of independence itself. All right, so let's go now to David. David, you have heard views of 5 different NADOs that participated in this project, and you might have your own views on the limits of independence in anti-doping. But just maybe to give you a hint, Michal Rinkowski mentioned it all too. There might be no universal definition of independence. It will change from culture to culture. And I think, and Michael has said also, good governance, it's not monolithic, it's not permanent, it will change as the circumstances, as the environment change. So do we need to settle up with that? Do we need to be satisfied with that, with those limitations?
Well, I don't think I'll ever be satisfied, Jorge. That's not within my comprehension. But what I can say is I think we have just heard many words of wisdom from each of the panelists on issues that are very dear to their hearts. And I drew a couple of expressions from it myself, and I think you've already noted some too. The question that Uno raised about loyalty and the conflict of interest when it comes to loyalty, I had not heard that spoken before, and I think that's significant. I think the issue relating to balance is very important, and I think the issues relating to the constraints that are posed upon all of us in anti-doping by the funders or those who have set the laws are very important for us all to understand, because each of us has a different set within our national capacity. And I think this project helps exemplify that. So from my perspective, this discussion is being very encouraging. The report is very encouraging, and I hope we will continue to debate the issues that we've started.
All right, thank you very much. So let me begin with this question from the audience. And I think one of the conclusions of the NADGO project was that athlete representation has improved in the last year, but it is not at a satisfying level, or it can be the level of engagement with athletes can be improved. And here's a question, and I'll pass the question to anyone in the panel who wants to pick it up. It comes from Rob Keeler, from Director of Global Athlete. Athletes are frustrated with the lack of transparency, independence, and accountability throughout the entire anti-doping movement led by WADA, and the athletes' voices continue to be ignored. So reforms to date have been superficial in nature. How can we turn this report into progressive reforms? Anyone who wants to take this question, please raise your hand so I can see it, and we'll begin with you. And if not, I can also find volunteers. I think Michael asked, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's a big question, not easy to answer, but I think we have all over the last couple of years acknowledged the fact that we need to include athletes more than we have done before, simply because, well, one could ask, why haven't we done that before? Because, I mean, the whole system is about athletes and the support personnel, of course. So why haven't we done that more from the beginning? I don't have the answer to that. I've only been in this game for 5-6 years, but I think we can all see that we need to do that. The problem here is to define what is an athlete, as also mentioned by David previously, and that's the same thing we're struggling with. I think in a lot of our countries, I think we all have connections with our athletes groups, because there are several groups, there are unions, and there are, you know, the committees under the National Olympic Committee maybe, or similar. And we try to balance it, but that is a problem. But I think to make substantial changes, I think we, and I know what Rob Keeler is probably referring mainly to the WADA system. I think we need to acknowledge that after 20 years with the hybrid model that we know from WADA, I think it's time to acknowledge that there are other stakeholders who need a say and maybe have more inclusiveness. And I'm talking about athletes, of course, but also other stakeholders like NADOs. And probably more. And I think if we can include these groups more in the decision-making process, I think we can have a system that is a little bit more transparent and more fit for purpose when we are talking 2029 demands.
Thank you, Michael. And just let me remind also the audience that this will be an essential part of tomorrow's session, a debate with athletes who will discuss also this question. So is there anyone else who has a view on this topic of integrating athletes within your NADO based on the findings of the report? Michal?
Excuse me, I think Andrea was first.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I will make it shortly, and I want also to follow Michael asking and answering this question, so that we have the athletes are in the center of our actions. And I guess we have to develop a model of participation, and also what, due to my experience, is that we have to talk to each other more often to explain what we are doing, to understand the aspects of others, and to get a common direction, because we all want to have clean sport. And I think communication is the key in all those questions, and to develop common models also in regard of transparency. Thank you.
Yeah, I think constant development, and David Howman just welcomed this discussion and the ability to engage with NADOs and all the stakeholders in the discussion of what is good governance and how can we achieve it. So this might be one of the conclusions of today, that this is just a continuous discussion with which we need to engage. So the issue of funding was addressed previously, and it was you, Andrea, who said long-term securing long-term funds for anti-doping organizations is a key to ensure independence. Let me ask this question back to you. and this is a question for the not only for you but for the entire panelists. What about adequate funding? So we don't want to talk about the source that the government is providing most of the resources to NADOs, nor the long-term stability of the funds, but more about the adequate funding. We know that, especially in developing countries, they have struggled, nations have struggled to set up and operate adequate anti-doping organizations. So shouldn't we just, isn't that going to be one of the limits of independence? Because these NADOs just lack the capacity and resources to, set up the right structures?
Yes, thank you for this. Maybe I'd like to explain a little bit more. So you can make pressure on an organization if you don't have sufficient financing. So then they are cut within their actions. On the other hand, it depends on different countries how sports is organized and how present sports is. So also Germany is a huge sports country. So Olympic, non-Olympic, winter, summer sport. And we do have a lot of athletes participating on high level. And I guess there we have to find a relation that we have an adequate anti-doping system, not only in testing, but also in education and prevention, not only the athletes, but with the whole entourage. And so I guess we have to find some formula around the world to see how is the best financing model, what is adequate, and how could we improve altogether. And I guess sport is a very important part in many countries of the world, and therefore anti-doping belongs to sport, and it's not possible to divide it anyhow, and therefore it must grow in the same way like it is done in sport support, financial support. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that has been mentioned is the independence should be reflected also in the people and the culture, and maybe in the routines of everyday task in the NADO. And Saneta at the beginning mentioned that independence is not only about paperwork, but it's about finding the right people and people with values that deal with the mandate of NADOs. So Saneta, do you think culture should be part of the dimensions of the broader concept of good governance?
Yes, maybe it's a good idea because, like Andreas said, it's about the structure, about the sports structure in the country. We are different sports structure, like Germany, like Poland, and this is different, and the anti-doping system is the same, different like another country, and the culture is improving, and change every year, every day, and yeah, it's very hard to explain the culture. It's the inside the good governance. But when we have some strict minimal requirements about for example, better governance or good governance, it's very useful for the country when develop this system. Because, for example, Slovakia NADO have a lack of the score about the democratic process and internal accountability and control. We have a very low score, and this is in compliance with the, for example, board. We don't have a board in Slovakia. And that's why we have quite problem about the score in these things. That's my view.
All right, yeah, but it might be just, as you say, too difficult to integrate a definition
Very
of
difficult.
culture into a project like this. Here, there's another question coming in, and I would like to ask this question to David Howman. And it comes from Antonio Julio Nunes, who is the director of the Portuguese anti-doping organization. It's partially a comment, partially a question. I believe, so regarding the independence of NADO, I believe the problem is not in the financing, it's not in the funding provided by the government. The problem lies in the people working within the NADO. If those responsible for the NADO are permissive to interference, then there is a problem. Then there's a need to find credible people with high integrity, because if NADOs, it can be, a NADO will always be a risk of factor for interference, whether the money comes from state or private institutions. So NADOs must have a legally guaranteed operational independence. Is this something you, how you perhaps at the AU have dealt with this issue, just finding people with a reputation and putting those people in charge? Is that kind of how we can encounter or counterbalance the risk of losing the independence?
Jorge, yeah, and thank you, Antonio, for the question. The issue is, I explain it this way: we can have very good rules and very good policies, but if we don't have good people to practice them, they're not worth the paper they're written on. And so I start from a point that has just been raised, that you need good people to create good governance, and selecting the people with the right values and background integrity is vital. Those people, however, to be able to govern, and we're talking just governance here, not management, have to have a modicum of freedom of expression, so they're not tied to the funders or those providing money for them in terms of delivery. So the AIU has a dependence, if you like, on World Athletics for its money. And we cannot get away from that. There's no other way of getting money through to the organisation. But it is doing well, in my view, because of the people around the board table who have been fully vetted by another independent organisation before they've been appointed. And that board has appointed a team of people in the integrity area who are seen as best people in their positions. And so it really is, and I'm obviously got a personal stake in all of this, so I've got skin in the game, and I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet. It's more the results speak for themselves, because we are one of the few organisations who has, for example, gone to the Court of Arbitration for Sport with the McLaren limbs information, and have had judgments from that court which vindicate the action, and the relative athletes have been sanctioned. But not only have athletes been sanctioned, officials have been sanctioned. So I get back to the issue that was raised earlier, Jorge, and forgive me for going on about this, but the athlete voice is important, not only from the perspective that it hasn't been heard loud enough to date, but also from the perspective that it's not just them who are subject to the rules of anti-doping. It's the officials who also must be held to account if they've behaved in a way that is contrary to the values and the explicit nature of the rules. And I think we're making steps in the direction of ensuring that occurs. And so another aspect that has come out of this whole Russian thing has been a little more across the board emphasis upon all of those who come under the conduct of the anti-doping regulations. So sorry to be a little long in my response, but I just wanted to make those brief comments.
Thank you, David. Just Una, one of the things that David mentioned was the Russian doping scandal at the end of his intervention. So this is going to be the last question for our panelists today before we wrap up the day. Una, do you think the Russian scandal has been has catalyzed, has accelerated the need for good governance and the speed at which NADOs have looked at their own governance and tried to improve it?
Yeah, look, it's a catalyst, I suppose. It draws attention to the situation and how badly wrong it can go in the wrong circumstances. And you know, it's quite unique in its own way. So I wouldn't like to think that other NADOs would feel that the situation is reflective of their own independence and their own operations. But if it has put a spotlight on good governance, then I think that has a huge value in it, and that has been a catalyst, I think, from that point of view. And we can talk about governance. It's, you know, in the same way as we're keen and anxious to ensure that the governance of WADA is in order. It's important that our own governance is in order, and you know, we all have a responsibility in this area. So yeah, look, it's been a good spotlight, put it that way. It's an unfortunate spotlight, I should say.
I agree with you. Well, I think I will not be able to summarize, and I wouldn't be able to summarize anyway, the concept of the limitations, the challenges of independence. But I hope that the audience has taken notes, and there are many conclusions. There are many good ideas that you have contributed to the discussion about the challenges that anti-doping organizations, especially NADOs, are facing with regards to independence. So I think we will stop here. I thank the panelists again. Also thank the audience for your questions and comments in making this more interactive. Before we leave, I ask everyone just to stay for a few more minutes. I hand over now to Jens from Play the Game to wrap up the day. And I thank the panelists. Thank you again, and we can close. You can close your camera.
Well, first of all, thank you to the audience for your patience. I see we still have a very good group left. Thanks also to David Howman for sacrificing a night's sleep in New Zealand to be with us. And if I may draw, and thanks of course to all the partners who have presented today, if I may draw a line from the last discussion we had, I can say that indeed the Russian international doping scandal was a motivation for us to put the spotlight in this project on national anti-doping systems. Please note that I prefer to call it the Russian international scandal, because it was not only carried out by Russians, but also by a very prominent World Federation for Sport, which has fortunately done a lot to reform itself since then. You may ask, what has become of the rest of the countries that we analyzed? What has become of Kenya, India, Portugal, Norway, that have not been represented today? Well, due to the sick leave of our scientific coordinator, we could not finalize the full report for this event as we had hoped. But as the project and the Erasmus Plus support dries out by 1st July, I can assure you that we have the full report with much more information available by 1st July, and we will make sure to notify you. Already now you can see in the little handle you have, or the pop-up menu, that we have 2 handouts. They should be visible for you, all participants. 2 handouts you can download with today's slides, and also with the entire tools and instructions about how to use it. This means you can go home and benchmark your own NADO. You can do it this evening if you please, if you have time and nothing else to do, but you can also do it over the coming weeks. To have, let us say, a certified outcome of your benchmarking, you must coordinate with Play the Game in order to be an official NADGO partner, but this is something we will set out a procedure how to achieve that. It was also asked whether we would produce a WADA benchmarking tool. I think that's very interesting. Many of the indicators that we highlight in we've picked for our NADGO tool would be relevant also for the World Anti-Doping Agency. But the whole question about WADA governance reform is one we have put on the agenda for tomorrow with very prominent speakers like Richard McLaren, Akash Maharaj, Emma Terrio, and she will be in the athlete session, but we have various good people appearing for tomorrow debates on athlete influence and on WADA governance. And I certainly hope to see you all tomorrow. I hope that you found it worthwhile to spend the last 3 hours with us, and we hope to see you all back tomorrow. Thanks a lot to everybody.